Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Kris number 2. Kris number 1 is out right now with throat strips. This is Apollo program One Giant Leap from Epic History TV. This is episode 2 of the 3-parter. And like and subscribe to the channel or stop watching. I want to say before I get started, Prime Day is the 12th and 13th of July, by the way. People don't know. I just want to say hello to... I'm only being viewed in the United States by 23.1% of the people now. UK 7.5%, Russia 7.4%, Germany 4.4%, Canada 2%. What's up, Canada? I've never tried poutine. That could have sounded dirty. I mean the food. So, I'm tired. Let's just end the video here. I'm 30 seconds in. Why am I 30 seconds in? Did I do something? Oh, that's right. Sorry. So this is Apollo program One Giant Leap. This is episode 2. I was getting ready to start it. It started, and then I went up and turned the air off and came back and then stopped the video. Didn't mean to. None of this matters to you. Okay. Scratch my head. And video time in 1,999,999. 99,998. 99,997. 99,996. 99,995. 1. I count goods.
1961. At the height of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space.
He's my neighbor.
Just weeks later, the United States launched its first astronaut, Alan Shepard.
He's my other neighbor.
Cabin, oxygen, go! All systems are go!
He was welcomed home as a hero. But President John F. Kennedy knew that if the United States was to overtake the Soviet space program, it needed a bolder mission.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
As Kennedy addressed Congress, the United States had just 15 minutes of human spaceflight experience. No one knew if a moon landing was even possible, let alone in just 9 years. It would be an unprecedented engineering and scientific undertaking, marked by heroism and tragedy. The incredible task of landing an astronaut on the moon would be known as the Apollo program. The Apollo program had been rocked by the tragic death of Apollo 1 astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White and Roger Chaffee. But it had recovered with the brilliant success of Apollo 7, the first crewed test of the Command and Service Module. And in 1968, after 7 years of intense research and development, NASA had flown 3 astronauts 240,000 miles from home and into lunar orbit. Apollo 8 flew within 69 miles of the moon's surface, but crossing that final gap would be the greatest challenge of the Apollo program. It would require a completely new and untested type of spacecraft, the lunar module. This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream, home to thousands of online documentaries about science, technology, the natural world and history. Their history section has hundreds of titles covering everything from early man and...
CuriosityStream sounds good.
In the wake of Apollo 8's daring journey to the moon, Apollo 9 received much less public attention. The mission wasn't even going to leave Earth orbit. But within the astronaut corps, the first crewed flight of the lunar module was seen as an even more exciting challenge. The mission's commander, Jim McDivitt, had actually turned down the chance to fly to the moon on Apollo 8, choosing Apollo 9 instead. Like many Apollo astronauts, he was a former test pilot, and this was a chance to test a brand new flying machine.
That makes sense.
2, 1, 0. Liftoff. We have liftoff at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Before the test flight of the lunar module could begin, the crew had a challenging docking maneuver to perform. The lunar module was folded inside the upper stage of the Saturn V rocket and needed to be extracted using the command and service module.
Roger, Houston, we're about 25 feet now on the closing point. All right, Houston, we're hard back. Good show.
Leaving command module pilot Dave Scott to fly the CSM, McDivitt and lunar module pilot Rusty Schweikert climbed aboard and undocked. The lunar module was the first true spaceship designed only to fly in the vacuum of space. Its insect-like body was designed without the constraints of aerodynamics, but every panel, bolt and button had to be as light as possible, so the craft could lift itself off the moon's surface. McDivitt said that it looked like cellophane and tinfoil put together with scotch tape and staples. He gave his craft the call sign Spider. Unlike the command module, Spider did not have a heat shield, so it would burn up if it tried to re-enter Earth's atmosphere.
Oh wow.
So, if the astronauts couldn't re-dock with the command module after their test flight, they would have no way of returning home. But Spider's test flight went perfectly. McDivitt and Schweikert flew the lunar module over 100 miles from the command module. They tested the ascent and descent engines and returned for a safe rendezvous. The lunar module was ready to fly to the moon. NASA had successfully tested both the command module and lunar module and made a trip around the moon. Many hoped the next mission would attempt the first moon landing. But NASA needed more experience in communications and tracking two separate spacecraft in lunar orbit, plus the challenges of rendezvous and docking in the moon's weaker gravity. And there was another critical unknown. In 1968, NASA scientists discovered that the moon has a highly uneven gravitational field. This is caused by huge lumps of high-density material in its crust, known as mass concentrations, or mascons, which could exert an uneven pull on a spacecraft and throw it off course. Before it was safe to attempt a landing, NASA would need to learn more about the mascons by examining their effect on another Apollo flight. Apollo 10 would be a dress rehearsal for the first landing attempt, flying every part of the mission, except for the final descent to the surface. The Apollo 10 crew was Commander Tom Stafford, Command Module Pilot John Young, and Lunar Module Pilot Gene Cernan. All three men were veterans of the Gemini program, and with 5 missions between them, they were the most experienced crew ever sent into space. Stafford and Cernan flew the lunar module to within 9 miles of the moon's surface. Their successful flight proved every phase of the mission, except for the final descent. Now, everything was in place. It was time to attempt the landing.
How tempted do you think they were to just go ahead and drop it down on the moon just to see how it lands? And I mean, you know what? We're on the moon. Let's go ahead and take off. Let's launch up from here and then redock. I don't think you'd want to be, no, because you probably didn't have the stuff to walk on the moon. But how tempting was it to just have said, you know what? Look how close we are. We're only 9 miles. Let's just land it. Let's just touch down. Just see what it feels like. Houston's probably like, nope, let's not do that. Let's just keep flying. And they're like, oh, stop being a bunch of silly geese. Let's just do it. See what happens. I would have been very, very tempted to do that. I wouldn't have, obviously. I'm not going to be a dick, but I really would have wanted to.
Apollo 11 would be commanded by Neil Armstrong, a brilliant engineer and test pilot. Early in his NASA career, he'd flown the experimental X-15 rocket plane, up to an altitude of 207,000 feet, at speeds of almost 4,000 miles per hour.
Damn.
When he joined the space program as part of NASA's second astronaut group, he was one of the few astronauts to be offered a command on his first mission, Gemini 8. Gemini 8 achieved the first docking of 2 spacecraft in orbit. But the mission almost ended in disaster when a faulty maneuvering thruster caused the Gemini capsule to spin wildly. Armstrong's calm and swift piloting brought the spacecraft under control, and although the mission was cut short, he'd proved his almost superhuman ability to remain calm under pressure. Joining him as lunar module pilot was Buzz Aldrin. A graduate of MIT, Aldrin wrote his doctoral thesis on piloting techniques for orbital rendezvous, and had an extraordinary understanding of orbital mechanics. He'd proven his expertise on Gemini 12. When the spacecraft's rendezvous radar malfunctioned, he was able to compute the orbital maneuvers himself and guide the capsule to a successful docking with an unmanned target rocket. The command module pilot was Michael Collins. He would remain aboard the command module whilst Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the moon. He had no regrets about his assignment, telling reporters that he was going 99.9% of the way there, and that was fine with him. But years later, he would recount his greatest fear, that Armstrong and Aldrin would be stranded on the surface, leaving him to travel back to Earth alone.
Oh, yeah. He did get the record, though, for farthest distance alone, because he did go around the moon. Okay. Skip the ad. It's fine.
The 15th of July.
He did get that record, but I mean, still, he went on the back side of the moon, dark side of the moon, all by himself. How scared do you think he was? And then, of course, you know, you are in the only way to come home. You have to be pretty worried. Like, I don't want to screw this up, guys. This is some balls.
July 1969. Almost 1 million people were gathering at Cape Kennedy to watch the 3 astronauts fly to the moon. But not everyone was there to celebrate. As launch preparations were made, around 150 people, mostly African-American mothers and their children, arrived at Cape Kennedy to protest the launch. They were led by the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, who had succeeded Dr. Martin Luther King as leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference after King's assassination the previous year. Their message was simple. It was inhuman to spend billions of dollars sending men to the moon, while 1 in 5 Americans lacked proper food, shelter, and health care. NASA Administrator Thomas Paine met with the protesters the evening before the launch. He told Abernathy that if we could solve the problems of poverty by not pushing the button to launch men to the moon tomorrow, then we would not push that button. Their terse meeting resolved nothing, but it ended with a handshake and a promise by Abernathy that he would pray for the safe flight of the astronauts. The following day, 10 of the protesters were invited into the VIP stands to watch the launch of Apollo 11.
Oh, it's cool they showed up.
10, 9, Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
4 days later, on the 20th of July, Armstrong and Aldrin climbed into their lunar module, call sign Eagle, and began their descent to the lunar surface.
Eagle has wings.
Years of hard work and training had led to this moment. The descent to the lunar surface would test their skills to the very limit. Back on Earth, in Houston, Texas, the staff of Mission Control watched as Eagle passed behind the moon for a final time. They monitored every system in both spacecraft and guided the astronauts through the complex flight plan. And the success of the mission was about to rest on the shoulders of 26-year-old guidance officer Steve Bales.
1202, standing by. 1202.
The master alarm sounded in the lunar module cockpit. Eagle's guidance computer was trying to tell the astronauts that something was wrong. Its simple display showed the numbers 1202, but neither Armstrong or Aldrin knew what this meant.
Reading on the 1202 program alarm.
Flight Director Gene Kranz was seconds away from calling an abort. He turned to Bales for answers. 1202 meant the guidance computer was overloaded. It had too many tasks to complete in its computing cycle, and was dropping some in order to continue functioning. Without a working guidance computer, the astronauts would have to abort. But the alarm wasn't sounding continuously. This meant that most computational cycles were being completed properly. Bales decided that as long as the problem was only intermittent, the landing could continue.
We're going that flight. If it doesn't reoccur, we'll be go.
But then, another problem. The lunar module was approaching the surface too fast, and had overshot its intended landing site. Now the computer was guiding them towards a massive, football stadium-sized crater, surrounded by a field of car-sized boulders. With the lunar module almost out of fuel, Armstrong took manual control. Mission Control could only watch. The landing rested on Armstrong's piloting skills.
60 seconds. Lights on. 4 forward, drift to the right a little. Down a half. 30 seconds forward drift. Contact light. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
As around 600 million people watched from Earth, Armstrong took his first steps on the lunar surface.
That's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind.
The precisely choreographed moonwalk had taken 2 years to plan. For 2 hours and 40 minutes, Armstrong and Aldrin gathered rock samples, set up scientific experiments, and took photographs. The Apollo 11 crew returned home as heroes. Their names now amongst those of the greatest explorers in history. Now that President Kennedy's goal had been accomplished, was there any point in returning to the moon? What was left for the Apollo program to achieve? The new mission would be science. The moon's origins remained a mystery. Where did it come from? Could its scarred surface tell the story of the early solar system? And in turn, help us understand the origins of our own world? But although NASA now possessed the knowledge and technology to land on the moon, it would soon receive a powerful reminder of the dangers of spaceflight.
We're still the one neighborhood. We got more of a problem.
Thank you to
Thank you to Epic History TV. This is pretty good. Obviously, we know that they landed. The moon landing was fake. It was filmed on a Hollywood studio. All you gotta do is watch The Shining. I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's pretty massive accomplishments. And I will say this: had Russia not, or Soviet Union, whatever that you want to be called, back then, had they not pushed, they wouldn't have pushed us. You know, I mean, I think the goals were all the same. So, I mean, we put in the work and everything like that, sure, but we were just trying to beat them. And had they not pushed us, it wouldn't have been, let's get there by the end of the decade or decade. It would have been, you know, let's get there whenever we can, you know, whatever. So it was an amazing feat. And then Neil Armstrong, I mean, he pretty much lived out the rest of his life just not in obscurity, but, you know, quiet. He was just like, yeah. But, you know, he probably walked around just thinking, yeah, I'm better than you. I was on another planet. I mean, you've always been on one. I've been on, like, you know, two. It's like, whatever. Because I would have been that guy. I would have been a total dick. I'd have been like, yeah, you know what? I don't need to hear this. I'm just going to go back to the moon. People would have just been so mad at me. I would have been the worst person to send there. I'd been like, this is one small step for man, but I am so much better than mankind. They'd have been like, mankind helped you get here. Oh, yeah. The wrestler? Sure he did. Terrible wrestling joke. All right, look, I'm going to go ahead and end this here. I'm going to go ahead and jump into part 3, and then I think I'm going to call it a night. But these videos will be up next week, I think, which will be up the 27th, I'm hoping. I still want to do the Napoleonic Wars second part. So, but has nothing to do with this. I'm going to end this here. Have a good day, have a good night.